Hey everyone, welcome. If we haven't met before, I'm Rebecca Pickens. I'm a certified book coach, developmental editor, and host of Self-Editing Essentials, a group coaching program for writers who have finished or almost finished writing their manuscript and are ready to learn the art of self-editing. So today I want to answer a question about subplots. One of the members of my group coaching program has been learning about subplots, reading about them in craft books. We talk about them in in my group a lot. And she was wondering and thinking about subplots in terms of her own work and wondering, how do you identify the subplot in your story? How do you know if your story needs one? And I just thought this was an excellent question because it's one that's going to impact most stories that we write. So let's start out really simply by defining a subplot. Subplot is simply a secondary storyline that complements, contrasts, or intersects with your main plot. A subplot is essentially supporting the main story or theme that you are putting forward. Usually, a subplot is going to involve secondary characters, but those secondary characters are almost always going to be involved somehow with the major characters in your story, with the protagonists. And subplots are there to add depth, tension, and really to engage readers emotionally on a lot of different levels. So, an example of this is The Wizard of Oz. Of course, if you know this childhood story, you know the story of Dorothy, right? She's been separated from home, from her home in Kansas, and she needs to find her way back. And of course, she's going to ask that wizard for help. But along the way, we've got lots of other subplots in this story. One of them, one of my favorite subplots in this story is, of course, the story of the scarecrow who has the desire for a brain. He feels like he is not smart enough, and that is his quest. So this subplot begins as soon as Dorothy meets him on the yellow brick road. And this subplot continues to develop as he begins to prove that he's actually far more clever, far more resourceful than he realized. Finally, it resolves itself when the wizard gives him his diploma to show him he had intelligence all along. This is a subplot because it is running parallel to Dorothy's journey. It has its own goal, it has resolution, and it's all the while reinforcing that main theme that we see throughout the story, which is the thing that you are seeking may already reside within you. And we have some other examples of subplots in this story. We have the Tin Man who's looking for his heart, and we have a cowardly lion who wishes to be brave. And in each of these instances, these characters, these secondary characters who are the backbone of the subplots that we're talking about, they are different in many ways. Those characters are unique. They're each looking for something different, but each of these subplots aligns very nicely with the major theme of the story, which is Dorothy's plot. And you can think about this is such a good example for understanding the power of subplot, because can you imagine the Wizard of Oz without that darling scarecrow or without the cowardly lion? It would not be the same story. Dorothy is a very important character, but her story alone would not grip us the way it does when it is aligned with these other subplots that revolve around characters who are very endearing and who just add lots more color and texture to the overall story. There are a lot of misconceptions that I see about subplots when I'm talking with writers. One of the first ones is thinking about backstory versus subplot. These are two very, very different techniques. Backstory informs our main plot, but it doesn't usually progress independently. A subplot, on the other hand, is its own story. It has its beginning, its middle, and its end. It is happening at the same time that that major story, the main plot, is happening. Backstory, on the other hand, is supporting, it's informing us about some background information to the story. Not every scene in a story is going to be subplot. Only threads that develop an arc or a theme alongside of your main story. So, in other words, a complete minor story. These are the only things we're going to consider a subplot. So here's a mini example. The hero, here's your main plot. The hero has to defeat the Dark Overlord, and your subplot may be the hero's friendship with a mentor is tested, and it ultimately teaches him to trust. So you see how both of these threads are going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they're going to happen at the same pace. Why do subplots matter so much? Why do we see them in so many different works of fiction and memoir as well sometimes? The first reason is it adds depth. It reveals facets of characters or the world that you're creating. We learn so much more about Dorothy because we watch her support her friends as well. These subplots pull Dorothy out of herself and out of her own challenges as she seeks to uplift these other characters in her life. And inevitably, that makes us care more about her. It makes us see different facets of her personality. We see her strengths and her weaknesses through the eyes of these other characters. Subplots can also reinforce themes. They can mirror or contrast a main plot. So if your plot is about a theme like There's No Place Like Home, we are going to get that much more clearly. We're going to have that delivered to us in a way that has all the more clarity because of those other characters in the story. Finally, smooth pacing. A subplot can really work wonders in breaking up long stretches of a single plot line. Oftentimes, as a developmental editor, I'll receive a manuscript from a writer, and it's excellent, it's solid. The story has all the things. But we're still feeling that the writer will usually come to me and say, I like what I've got here. I think it's really good, but there's something about it that feels kind of boring. And when we start to dissect the story structure, what's often apparent is that the story is fine. It's just that it's keeping us in one place all the time, or it's keeping us in one emotion all the time. So, for example, if you are writing a story about a shop owner, and lots and lots and lots of your story takes place in that shop, it's going to be much more difficult to keep them engaged and make them feel like this story has momentum because you're in the same place the whole time, right? And likewise, if you are maybe writing a really exciting story and there are a lot of battle scenes and there's lots of exciting stuff happening all the time, that can actually become rather exhausting. In both those scenarios, I would recommend to the writer weaving in a subplot. In the first instance, where we're in this shop all the time, how about a subplot that involves your shop owner going home or going to another job or any manner of different things, just so we have that variation in setting? In the second example I provided, which is actually an example from real life, I'm working with a client who's doing this really cool, sprawling story. It's a saga with lots and lots of action. In order to not exhaust the reader, what she's done beautifully is peppered in quieter scenes that compile a subplot that's much more psychological than action-packed and plot-driven. And she is really beautifully using these kind of going back and forth between battlefield scenes and kind of home and hearth, cozier scenes. And she's creating a different tone by weaving the subplot into her major story. How to spot the subplot in your story. So let's say you have almost finished writing your book or you're pretty far along and you're not even sure if you've got a subplot or not. There are ways that we can look at your story and figure that out. The first thing is to ask for each thread, right? So everything that doesn't speak directly to the main story that you're telling, ask, does it have its own conflict and resolution? Does it intersect with the main plot in a meaningful way? Does it reveal something new about a character, a theme, or aspects of the world that you're building? If yes, it's probably a subplot you've got. If not, it just might be a scene that's bolstering your main story, or it may be a bit of backstory. Examples of subplots. We see these all the time. We see romantic subplots where a character learns about love or commitment. We see friendship and mentorship subplots that test loyalty, trust, growth. Then, of course, we've got character arc subplots where a secondary character is facing personal growth or challenge. Think about that scarecrow again. And then thematic subplot, which can reinforce main story themes in a smaller context. So if you get to a stage where your story is almost finished, you're feeling pretty good about it, but you do believe that your book would be benefited by more texture, more layers. It may be that you want to add another subplot. And if that's the case, you want to do it strategically. In other words, we want to make sure it doesn't feel like you're just tacking that subplot on at the end because you knew you needed a subplot. We want it to look like it was all part of your original inception, that it belonged there and it was there all along. So there are some strategies we can employ in order to make sure that that's the case. The first one is to really identify what the purpose of your subplot is. Every subplot, like we said, has a larger purpose. It's supporting the main plot and your story's themes. So what we're going to do is think about how that can be woven in so that it is moving through your story at the same pace as your main story, your main plot's overall arc. So in other words, that middle, beginning, or sorry, the beginning, middle, and end are happening at the same time. They're kind of happening in conjunction with the main story's arc as well. We want to keep it manageable. There is no hard, fast rule about this, but typically a novel will have maybe 1 to 3 subplots. Too many start to dilute the tension that we feel otherwise. We can't invest in so many subplots with all our, as readers, with all our heart and soul, right? So we want to make sure that we're not overwhelming readers. We want them to connect with the subplots that we do choose to present in a very meaningful, deep way. And then as you start to figure out what your subplot's going to be, what it's going to look like, and where it belongs in the story, how you're going to unfold it, you're going to want to test each subplot and ask yourself, does it interact successfully with the main plot? Is it doing anything to build tension? Is it reinforcing the story's core, the story's themes? Is it teaching us something new about the world? Is it teaching us something new about the characters in that world? Just really thinking about what kind of purpose is it serving. I hope that this was helpful for you. Subplots are so much fun to play with. They really can change a story and elevate it and make it feel more sophisticated and more polished. So I wish you well with this. I would love to hear about your experiences working with Subplot. If you have something you want to share or ask about this topic, stick it in the comment section. I'd love to see. And if you have a question for me, reach out. I would love to answer it here. If this video was helpful, please like and subscribe. It really helps me continue to deliver free content every Tuesday just like this. All right, happy writing.